sacrilege as the slaying of the sacred cat of Bubastes and the murder of a high priest of Osiris should have taken place within so short a time of each other. All prophesy that some terrible calamity will befall the land, and that the offended gods will in some way wreak their vengeance upon it. A royal order has been issued enjoining all men to search for and arrest every person concerned in the murder of Ameres, and doubtless the severest penalties will be dealt to them. The same decree orders your arrest wherever found, and enjoins upon all officials throughout the kingdom to keep a strict watch in the towns and villages, to examine any strangers who may present themselves, and to send hither bound in chains all young men who may fail to give a satisfactory account of themselves. Sacrifices will be offered up at all the temples throughout the land to appease the wrath of the gods. Messengers have been dispatched in all directions in the provinces, and all seemed to consider it certain that in a few hours our hiding place would be discovered. All made sure that we had made either for the seacoast or the desert on one side or the other, and as the messengers would reach the coast long before we could do so, it was considered impossible for us to get through unnoticed. Then I went to the house, not intending to go in, but simply to see if those in the neighborhood had heard any further news. The gates were open, and quite a crowd of people were passing in and out to gratify their curiosity by gazing on the scene. Relying upon my disguise I went in with the rest. None entered the house, for a guard of soldiers had been stationed there. I passed round at the back and presently Liptis, the old female slave, came out to fetch water. I spoke to her in my assumed character, but she only shook her head and made no reply. Then believing that she, like all the others in the house, was attached to the family and could be trusted, I spoke to her in my natural voice, and she at once knew me. I made a sign to her to be silent, and withdrew with her alone to some bushes. The tears were streaming down her face. "Oh, Jethro," she exclaimed, "did the gods ever before hurl such calamities upon a household? My dear master is dead, my Lord Chebron is hunted for as men hunt for a wild beast. My dear young mistress Mysa is missing." "Missing!" I exclaimed. "What do you mean?" "Have you not heard it?" she said. "I have heard nothing," I cried. "Tell me all." "Just after the gates were beaten down and the crowd rushed along into the garden, 4 men burst into the house and ran from chamber to chamber until they entered that of my young mistress. We heard a scream, and a moment later they came out again bearing a figure enveloped in a wrapping. We strove to stop them, but there were naught but women in the house. They struck 2 of us to the ground, and rushed out. Some of us ran out into the garden crying for aid, but there we saw a terrible scene. A great struggle was going on, and presently you broke forth, covered with blood and wounds, and ran swiftly past. None heeded us or our cries. When the soldiers arrived we told the officer what had happened, but it was too late then, and nothing could be done. Had there been a guard over the house all these things would never have happened." I asked her if she could describe to me the appearance of the men. She said that they were attired as respectable citizens, but that from their language and manner she believed that they were ruffians of the lowest class. For a time I was so overwhelmed with this news that I could think of nothing, but I went out and roamed through the streets. At last I bethought me of the girl Ruth. She was with Mysa at the time, and might, if questioned, be able to tell me more than the old woman had done. I therefore returned, but had to wait for 3 hours before old Liptis came out again. "I want to speak to Ruth," I said. "Send her out to me." "Ruth has gone," she said. "Gone!" I repeated. "Where and whither?" "That we know not. It was not until hours after Mysa was carried off that anyone thought of her. We were too overwhelmed with grief at the death of our dear lord and the loss of Mysa to give a thought to the young Israelite. Then one asked where was she. No one had noticed her. We went to Mysa's chamber, thinking that the villains who carried our young mistress off might have slain her, but there were no signs of her there." "But she was with Mysa, was she not?" I asked, "when the attack was made. Did she not pass in with her when she came in from the garden?" "Yes," she replied, "they came in together, and passed through us; for we gathered in the front chamber, being greatly frightened at the clamor at the gate. As they passed us our young mistress said, 'Keep silent, what is the use of screaming and crying?' I asked if she was sure Ruth was not carried off as well as Mysa. 'Quite sure,' she said. 'One bore a figure, and the other 3 cleared the way.' "'And that was the last time,' I asked, 'that any of you saw the Israelite?' "'It was,' she answered. 'She must have passed out by the door at the end of the passage, which she might well have done without being observed by any of us.' This was a new mystery. Why Ruth should have fled I could not guess, because as soon as the soldiers appeared there was no more danger in remaining. Besides, I did not think Ruth was one to shrink from danger. However, there was no more to be learned, and I again went out into the streets. Chapter 13